that weren't on yesterday, just a quick background of Traces of the Trade, so everybody will be on the same page as we move into the discussion.
I'm a direct descendant of America's foremost slave traders. A cousin found this information out about 22 years ago and decided she had to do, excuse me, do something positive with that terribly negative information. And so this young woman who had never made a movie before decided to make a documentary film. And 10 cousins, myself and 9 others, went to Bristol, Rhode Island, which is where these rogues were based. The US slave trade was centered in Narragansett Bay, Rhode Island, and was predominantly run out of New England. We went to Bristol. The group of us went to Ghana in West Africa. And then we went to Cuba, where the family had owned 5 plantations. The whole, with 2 film crews with us everywhere we went, filming all of our conversations. And it ended up being a remarkably dramatic film that I think gently invites people into a conversation on race that they typically don't want to have, which is why we use it for this. Traces premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It was on PBS and has won many, many awards. And importantly, it was nominated for an Emmy Award for historical research because of the research that was done that disclosed really, for most people, for the first time, that the North was just as complicit in slavery as the South was. And when we go to Southern states, people applaud us when they hear that. They're very grateful to hear that.
Katrina Brown, who is the, she came up with the idea and reached out to cousins like Dain. And she really, and she's the director of the film, she wanted to deepen the national conversation on race and racism. And so we use the film. Dain and I have traveled around the country screening the film. We're close to 600 times over the past 19 years in all sorts of venues, places of worship, schools from 5th grade up, corporations, any place people gather. Sometimes the audience is all Black, sometimes they're all white, most of the time. And there are times when they are a mixture of people. And what we do is use the film to invite people to share their stories, building on the stories that they have heard from Dain and his 9 cousins. They have shared their stories in the film as they made their journeys. We all have stories to share, whether we are Black or white or people of color.
Pat, if I may, I'd like to answer a question I know you're not going to ask.
Okay.
I think it's a very important one for people to hear. We did a screening last August for one of the top 50 corporations in the country. It was for the top 65 executives of one of their divisions. Very diverse group geographically, but very white and almost entirely white group. It was a very good conversation. We had a review of the conversation about 2 months later, and the executive who invited us to do it said that the day after we had the screening of the film, she communicated with their human resources department and all of their headhunters, their search firms, and said, from now on, when we have we're doing a search for an executive in the director or manager or above level. I want to have a diverse group of candidates. I insist on that. And between August and November, they had hired 10 candidates. 30% of them, 3 of them were African Americans. And she said, we never would have found them if I had not given that instruction, and refused to accept several candidate groups that were not diverse. So the decision-making the change has to come from the top.
And it was through that conversation, those screening conversations that planted enough of not planted the seed, but really energized her and got her focused and realizing I can't continue to say I want to do something. I have the opportunity to do something because of my position, and she did.
Right. So that you mentioned the corporate clients that you've done this for. You've been doing it for 19 years. From 19 years ago, when you first started doing it, to today, like these corporate clients like us and so forth, what are some of the changes you've seen in the people you've done it for, and the comments and the questions and the reaction to the film and so forth? What are some of the changes over 19 years? Because a lot has certainly happened in our society in 19 years.
I think the conversations I would characterize the conversations as very rich. People have shared their stories, but I would say 4 or 5 years ago, we noticed a significant change. And the change that we noticed were mostly from people who were white, who shared their stories, their feelings. And it was not just the sharing of the word, it was a lamentation. And that was the word that both of us used. They are lamenting the pain, the loss, the grief, the loss of relationship with people of color who they had known when they were growing up or professionally. The realization that racism has been a problem during their lifetime, and they have done little to nothing about it, and grieving that. And this came from people who have been doing racial justice work for a long time, who said, I thought we were further along than we are. I realize that we are not. And I need to step up. That from me has been, and then on the other side, from African Americans, what I have heard, and from other people of color, is I'm tired. I am afraid and worried for my children and my grandchildren. I marched and fought for civil rights and voting rights in the 60s. And now I'm in my 60s and I'm still having to do the same thing. And it's costing us our lives. Those are the differences that I've seen.
And a lot of white people saying, I thought I'd been paying attention to what's going on in the world, and I did not understand how bad things are. And it's been a huge shift.
So what would that understanding that people are beginning to have, it dawning on people, would that be something that gives you hope? What else gives you hope in the midst of all these hard times and hard things that are going on and hard conversations? You've been doing it 19 years. What keeps you going?
Up until about literally a week ago, I would have said and did say that the fact that people keep inviting us to have these conversations with them. We don't do any advertising. It's all word of mouth. That gave me hope. I'm a descendant of people who were enslaved. And back in 2000, when we were at the Mennonite University for a gathering in 2006, during a break, I literally heard the voices of my ancestors saying, "Welcome to this work. We've been waiting for you. Now's your time." And so what gives me energy and commitment is that I am doing this on behalf of my ancestors who are my blood relatives and ancestors who are not. I'm doing it for people who live today and for future generations. What gives me strength and hope is my faith. And I have my partner, Dain, with me. What gives me hope is when I look into the faces now on the Zoom screens of the people who are grappling, struggling with this issue. That gives me hope.
And what gives me hope is going to the schools that we go to. And we've been from some of the very, very top Episcopal boarding schools in the country to in the inner city middle schools. And our kids are not as far along as we think they are. They are not. However, the conversations we have with them are more open, more honest, more direct than conversations we have with adults. It's not uncommon that we hear a youth say, "I see racism on the athletic field. I see it in the classroom. I see it in my home. I see it in my church. And I don't know what to do about it because I can't speak out. I don't know what to do about it." Hearing those words from young people gives me hope.
So you all heard yesterday some about our Becoming Beloved Community Ministry and how excited we all are about that ministry here at Ascension. I wonder what advice you would give that group as they move forward in their ministry. You heard this morning from Marianne what some of the other Sunday school classes are looking at. But what would you say to this really great and engaged and enthusiastic group of folks as they move forward in this particular ministry?
It is hard, complicated, complex work. You're going to be challenged. You're going to hear things you don't want to hear as you do this work. The work is critically important. It is God's work, and stick with it. One of the problems is we white folks have a reputation for beginning the work and then letting it fall aside, beginning the work and then letting it fall aside. A white church communicates with a black church saying, "We want to form a relationship," and it lasts maybe 2 or 3 years, and it's the white church that pulls back. The work you all are doing is exceptional. What you have done in the very short period of time you've been doing it is indeed exceptional. But you need to stick with it. It's hard. It's hard. And there will be pushback in the parish. I don't know if you have had that yet, but there will be pushback in the parish. Some folks saying, "We can't do this, don't do this." And it's challenging, but it's important.
I think one of the things that I would say that you have in your favor at Ascension is the fact that this bubbled up from the congregation. This was not an edict from you or the bishop that you must do this work. It bubbled up, and when I have seen that happen, people have buy-in. There is energy because it's their idea. They're organizing it, they're planning, they're acting on it. And I think that's a plus. The challenge will be of how do you sustain that energy? How do you sustain that? And realizing that you will not stay at that same level. You will get tired, and you will become discouraged. But there will be those among you, even if it's just a handful, who will be energized and focused. Rest on them, lean on them. Someone said in our church at a service many years ago that when we say the creed and we say, we believe, use the word we. And he suggested that there may be those of you in the pews who can't say I. So we're saying we for you. We're holding you up. And it's important that you support each other because we will get tired. This is the long game. This is the long game.
I'd like to add something, and I think this is critically important. We've seen this happening in many other churches. If you do not have an agreement on that Becoming Beloved Community Committee to, in effect, have term limits, that you're on there for 5 or 6 years, and then you move off and someone new comes on, that is a reseeding of the effort. Otherwise, if it's the same group of people there 10 years from now, you won't be doing the work. It will become a clique.
That is great advice.
Yeah,
that is great advice.
And we have seen that happen.
Yeah. Sylvia and Pat, take note of that.
And it doesn't mean that you won't be engaged, but you can be resources, right? There are other ways to tap into that knowledge and that energy.
Yeah.
On our last meeting, I wrote down how do we organize ourselves, and I only plan to stay on another year or so because there needs to be succession.
Yep. Good.
I'm very acutely aware of that.
Good. So before we get to opening it up, there were a couple other things I wanted to ask you all. One of those, Dain, give us an update on everybody who was on the film, on your family and the people that we met on the film. What are they all doing? Or how many of them are still involved in this work? Just give us a quick update on those folks.
Sure. Sadly, Ledley passed away last year. Wonderful human being.
He was the priest, right? He was the Episcopal priest.
Yeah. And said the most meaningful things in the film, I think. Katrina has had to slow down a little bit, but she is still doing some speaking engagements. Tom DeWolf has written 3 books. I mentioned Inheriting the Trade, but if you go to his website, you can see the other 2. And he's on the speaking circuit, has been since 2002, or really 2008 when the book was published. James is still deeply involved. Holly, cousin Holly, is doing some screenings in the greater Denver area. And that's about it.
Okay.
And Elizabeth is doing some work too.
The cousin that was older cousin in the film who said, "Damn." Who was that, and tell us about her?
Kyla, and she has some health problems that have slowed her down. Importantly, however, this was not a character in the film, but St. Michael's Church in Bristol had us do a screening for them last year.
Great.
We also did a 5-week book group study on the book Waking Up White with them just several months ago. So they have turned around and are involved, as is Linden Place, the mansion. They're now very active in telling.
Great. And Constance, the other question I had for you was in the longer biography that you all sent me. And that had to do with people have asked you over the years if you knew about Dain's family when you all met and got married. You want to address that?
Well, we met, really came into each other's life in 1999 on a committee.
A church
committee.
Got to watch those.
And we were on that committee for about 6 months, and then it ended. And I was aware of Dain. And I'll tell you, when I walked into the meeting room and I looked across the room, the only person I knew was the priest who had invited me. And I literally, as I crossed the threshold, looked across. Dain was standing in the window. I didn't know who he was. And I felt a tap in the back of my head. And the voice said to me, "Pay attention to that man." And that man was Dain.
Wow.
And so, we 6 months, and then we didn't see each other. And then 6 months later, we met up again. And he told me, we started talking, and he told me a little bit about his family's background, and that he would be making a trip to Ghana, and why. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. I can't wait until you get back to tell me about it." So I did know that much about it. And when he came back, he did tell me about it. We had dinner and he told me about it. Never, ever did I think that I would be joining him, doing what we're doing, traveling around, having these conversations. Never, ever. God certainly has
a wild sense of humor,
and can be amazingly surprising.
Great. Thank you. So Gigi, let's maybe we should go back to gallery view. Maybe.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Remove your spotlight and remove your spotlight.
And then why don't we do what we did yesterday, which is to let folks ask questions in the chat box, or maybe we just should put names like we did yesterday, and then they can ask their question. That would be more efficient, I think. So if you would put your name in the chat box with your first name and last initial, and then Gigi can call on you and you can ask your question of Dain and Constance. And Gigi, let's just kind of do what we did yesterday. And Dain and Constance, well, I don't know if we need any kind of time limit on any of this, because Dain and Constance are probably going to be doing most of the talking. But and we'll go as far as we can in the allotted time. We've got about 25 minutes till we're supposed to stop, and then we'll see what happens. The clergy will need to go get ready for church, but I don't know, y'all may go a little further. So
we usually do breakout rooms following so we'll go to those.
Okay. All right. So Gigi, why don't you moderate now and call on the folks who are putting their names in the
Okay, first on the queue is Ann Lamb with Francis Butler on deck. So Ann Lamb, if you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question of Dain and Constance.
I think it's important. I missed the presentation. Okay, so I'm behind on the background, but I think it's important to ask the question, to follow the money and find out who it benefits for this to continue, for systemic racism to continue. It has to be of benefit, financial benefit to someone for it to continue. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. That's it.
Very good observation. With us, either fortunately or unfortunately, these were a bunch of rogues in Rhode Island, and the enormous wealth that they had developed was dissipated completely within 3 generations. In fact, the town of Bristol went bankrupt because one of the DeWolfs went bankrupt. But following the money, it has always been about the money. And frankly, it's been about white people not wanting to do the work that had to be done, the hard work that had to be done. They got Black people and brown people and Native Americans to do the work for them, and made enormous amounts and continue to make enormous amounts of money from it.
And one of the things that's happening throughout the Episcopal, well, I won't say throughout, but one of the things that's happening in the Episcopal Church, and many parishes have undertaken this work of looking at their history and looking at the money. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Pat.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I thought you were through, Constance. I'll say something just a
No,
second.
so just and where did the money come from? How was the money used? And how they might, in discovering that history, that knowledge, repair the damage, the psychological and emotional and real damage done to African Americans, especially.
And some institutions have been looking very closely at their buildings and how those buildings were built with slave labor. Virginia Seminary did that and has made not only an apology for that, but has set aside some money to try and figure out a way to do some sort of reparation, I think. I think Swanee also may have done a little bit of that work. And there are other institutions who have looked at how their buildings were built with slave labor. So some of that work sort of is connected to the idea of the money and the labor benefiting the institutions.
We attend Trinity Church in Copley Square, Boston, and the land that was given for the original Trinity Church in something like 1725 was donated by one of Boston's foremost slave traders.
Next question, Gigi.
Next up is Frances Butler with Ted Smith on deck.
Good morning. Those of you who know me know that I used to be a public school teacher in Birmingham, Alabama, in the inner city. I taught Black children and I taught white children. I now have 3 young grandchildren. My question is this: how can we help our children get out of this cycle of racism?
Well, I think part of it begins with adults and doing your homework and doing your learning and becoming comfortable with the truth within yourself. Because until you do that, when your children ask questions or they're curious about things, they're watching what you say and how you say it, and they're picking up clues. In the book, and if you haven't read it, I'm making a pitch for it. The book Waking Up White, written by Debbie Irving. She talks about a conversation that she had with her mother innocently, the age of 7 years old, when she was talking about her Indian dolls that she had. And her mother made several comments that she recalled as an adult that planted the seed of bigotry and racism. That's what I would say, a place to start, Francis.
Francis said that's a critical question. No baby has ever been born racist. It's an acquired skill. And the place that it is mostly learned is in the home. There was an article written in Newsweek in, I think, 2009, entitled, Is Your Baby Racist? I urge you to Google it and read the article. It talks about how even very well-intentioned white parents do a horrible job trying to assist their children moving out of that. Racism is an insidious thing. A good friend of ours, a priest who did this work for over 50 years, used to say, racism is a slippery slope. It catches even people of goodwill. There are some new books that are out on how to talk to children about it. I don't know them yet, haven't read them, but do some searching online and you'll probably find 2 or 3 that are quite good.
2 other very quick things, if I might add. There's been a lot that has been going on across the country in the past 12 months. Talk to them about it. Talk to them honestly. The second thing, you can never start too young. We were telling the story as we were visiting with each other a little bit ago before this conversation began about a 5-year-old little white girl in Vermont who said, no life can matter until Black lives matter. She's 5 years old. She got that sentiment, those ideas from her parents because they talk about it. Children know, they pick up clues. It's the adults that are the ones running away.
Who's next, Gigi?
Next, we have Ted Smith with Marion Wanamaker on deck.
Good morning.
Morning.
I will, just to let you know, Ledley Laughlin was my pastor or rector in New York City back in the 70s and 80s. And it was great to see his face on there, to know that he had gone on this journey with you. One of the things that I saw yesterday that for me was particularly poignant, and it sort of hits where I sit a lot of the time, was when you were in Ghana and there was a distinctive discomfort with the people there when you were meeting with the people there. And I think y'all basically felt unwelcome at certain points. That's been my experience sometimes in trying to push through my own issues. How do we just sit there with that? How do we work through that? Anything you have to say would be very helpful.
Wow. We have to move beyond the discomfort, have to move through it. We're uncomfortable about doing a lot of things, but work our way through it. Wonderful friendships can be developed with people who don't look like us. It's tragic how fearful we are of people who don't look like us. When we first got to Ghana and got to the first slave fort, that we went to. I've forgotten which one it was. Um, there were many, many, many people there. There were celebrations going on in, must have been Elmina, and a lot of Africans there. And we were in the bus. We had to wait for, we were told it might be a couple of hours before we could go into the slave port. And so I said, let's go walk through the village. And everybody else froze. We can't do that. What are you talking about? And I alone went and walked through the village and had a wonderful walk. One other quick example. On the Sunday that we were in Ghana, that's when we had that very difficult conversation that was in the film. And I said, I've got to take a break. There's an Anglican cathedral right across the street. I'm going to go over and see if there's a service going on. Everybody panicked. We can't do that. We won't be welcome. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to do it. And I said, well, I'm going to go anyway. And Ledley went with me. We got there. They were in the middle of a service, packed cathedral, over 400 people there. We were the only two white noses. When we went to receive communion, the Dain grinned from one ear to the other. And at the end of the service, during the benediction, he said, I would like to thank the two white gentlemen for joining us. They could not have been more welcoming. And we tend to be reluctant to take that risk.
I think that it's important to recognize that you will have experiences like that. And there are some African Americans and people of color who will not want to engage because they simply can't, because of the anger, the frustration, the impatience, for very legitimate reasons. There are those who will. And I think it's important to try to understand, that's where that learning comes in for people who are white. As Dain says, people who are white, you don't know what you don't know, right? Well, you've got to learn more about what you don't know. And there will be people, I am willing to engage. That's why we do what we do. But not every African American or person of color would do this and could do this. Not everybody could be a Martin Luther King Jr. Not everybody could be a John Lewis. And it's important to understand that and not dismiss all of us.
Thank you.
Next, we have Marion Wanamaker with Emily Rowcliffe on deck.
Hi again. Okay, so my question is, as I was watching or listening to the film yesterday, one of the things that really struck me was that you're grappling with sort of relatives from the ancient past who have this sordid history. And some of us are grappling with relatives in the present who have tendencies that we are not in favor of, I'll put it that way. And that's not to say, that I don't have my own tendencies. I'm aware of those, but I can draw, I think, a pretty clear line between the way I behave and the way some people that I'm related to behave. And I would love to know your advice for those of us grappling with these people in our lives whom we love, but we also recognize are causing damage in their behavior to other people.
Holly has a brother, one of the cousins in the film, who tried desperately to not have the film be made. because he was afraid of the impact it would have on him. I would say, call them out when they do it. Say that's unacceptable. We really need to call people out. It may mean that there's an uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner or an uncomfortable Easter dinner or Christmas dinner. But people need to know that what they are saying is not acceptable. And unless they are called out, and you can do it very diplomatically, unless it is pointed out to them, they may not even know what it is they're doing. Constance yesterday said something to me that I didn't appreciate. And I said to her what she said and that I didn't appreciate it. And she said, I had no idea I said that. I have no idea I said that. I'm sorry. And it is such a common thing for so many white people to use the derogatory and racist language that they may not even be aware that they're doing it. So let them know gently, but let them know.
The other thing, Marianne, is I would ask them, so why do you think that? Why do you feel that way? And see if I could engage in a conversation with them of trying to pull out from them why they're thinking and feeling that way. And if they are willing to read a book that might help them, read an article that might help them.
Give them a copy of Waking Up White.
So that it's not just coming from you, but it's coming from an outside. That's one of the gifts, I think, from Katrina in the film, that she uses an outside voice, third voice of people to tell their story. And I don't know whether she thought this would happen, but I think it creates the kind of environment that invites the audience into sharing their stories. And so doing that, so it's not just coming from you. Those are my suggestions. It's not easy. It's hard work. Keep doing it. Keep at it.
And it's uncomfortable, but it needs to be done.
And of course, what we tend to do in the South is say, in some situation like that, our go-to phrase is, well, bless your heart.
Yes.
That's what we say, right, in the South. Yeah, those are hard conversations. And it is a big leap for a lot of folks to confront that in the moment, in our Thanksgiving dinners and so forth. But I think you're right. It takes some courage to actually confront somebody like that. And I tend to invite people when I'm asked that question to do it in writing, because you can edit and craft and make sure you say what you want to say and don't fall into the trap of saying something in the moment that gets that it unintentionally escalates. So anyway,
and it may not work.
It may not work. Yeah. They don't know any better. That's right, Marianne. Yeah, we say that as well. Yeah. They are uninformed.
Save everybody. You're not going to be able to bring everyone along. We're not.
Yeah.
And let's focus our energy. Let's love the people who we can love, and try to work with the people who want to be engaged, who are still challenged and who are still struggling, but they're willing. And that's because that exists, that kind of, it exists with people who are white, who are on one extreme, and people of color who are on another extreme. And I hope there are more of us in the middle. And that's where I want to put my time and my energy.
You know, we talked some yesterday about General Convention 2006. I was there and I went to a Eucharist sponsored by Integrity, where Gene Robinson was the preacher, and Gene's got his blind spots, but he talked in that sermon about all the ways that people had been difficult, very unkind to him and some of the Integrity folks. And the theme of his sermon was love them anyway. Love them anyway. And I think that is a refrain for Christians who are faced with people with racist views as well, that we love them anyway. And by loving them, perhaps we can make inroads into their where they're coming from. So I think we have time for like one more, don't we, Gigi?
Well, good, because we've got only one left signed up, and that is Emily Rowcliffe.
Hey, yeah. Just want to briefly touch on what Anne Lamb asked about what to do regarding children and racism. Black children are surrounded by white culture. They've got to know their own history and culture and white history and culture, whereas white children can often be very secluded within their own culture and identity and history. And so it's really important for white children to read Black voices, to read Black stories, to go out into Black communities and have Black friends and cross those boundaries. I believe Dain and Constance talked about boundary crossing earlier. And it's important to start at a young age, not so that they can be colorblind to where they don't see color, but to where they understand the plight in their own developmentally progression of the plight of their Black friends. I remember being at a young age and realizing that my Black friend had to watch out for police cars and understanding why. And that can be taught at a young age, because the Black children are taught that at a young age, so should the white children. And so it really is about going into those communities and getting to know them at a young age and being surrounded by their culture and their history. And then my question to Dain and Constance is, we've heard a lot about leaders in the church that inspire us, like Bishop Curry, but I want to know your thoughts on secular leaders and movements that inspire you in your work.
Good question.
Well, first of all, your name is Emily, right? Is it Emily? Yeah, because you were there last night. Yeah. Thank you for your observation, and I share that. The movement that inspired me greatly was and continues to be the Black Lives Matter movement. In the 60s, I think I said this last night, in the 60s, it was Black and white people who marched and protested and who died. The white people who were there, a large number of them were from the Jewish community. They were Jews. And I think in part, it was because there is such synergy in our stories and struggle. There are differences, major differences. The Black Lives Matter movement was more diverse, is more diverse in every way, shape, or form. Race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual preference, you name it. I have never seen such a broad coalition of people committed and energized to fight for justice for all and racial equality for all. And it doesn't mean that people who are white, lives don't matter. It means that we in this country, as African Americans and people of color, have not been treated by systems and institutions in this country like our lives matter. The message that we have gotten from every institution, including the church, is that our lives have less value and less meaning than the lives of people who are white. That's why we say that. And that's the movement that I support, one of the movements that is so very important to me.
There is a huge conference that takes place every year now called the White Privilege Conference. Interestingly enough, it was started by an African-American man, maybe 15, 20 years ago, but thousands of people attend it now. And it's for those who may be interested, it is an excellent thing to participate in. There aren't many real white movements going on, at least that I'm aware of. Are you?
Nope.
No, no. Hate to say it, but we don't need to do the work because we're comfortable.
Yeah.
Another excellent read. Google "Unpacking Your Invisible Knapsack" by
Peggy McIntosh.
Peggy McIntosh. "Unpacking Your Invisible Knapsack" by Peggy McIntosh. It's all about white privilege. And I had to read the darn thing 5 times before I fully understood what it was she was saying. White privilege is a very challenging thing for most of us white folks to get our heads around.
All right, with that, I think we need to sort of move into the next phase because Christopher and I have to go get ready for church. Gigi, in terms of breakout rooms, what are you doing?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a closing prayer, and I will let Marianne introduce our closing prayer person.
Yes, it'll be brief. So Peggy Giles, are you still on?
I am.
Okay, it's you. Go for it.
Let us pray. Oh God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infects our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purpose on earth. That in your good time, all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us this morning. It's a privilege.
It's been a blessing to spend time with you and
Dain and Constance, we are so grateful for your presence with us and all your ministry. Dain, we look forward to hearing your sermon here in just a little while. And then I think you all said you were going to tune in to our Absalom Jones discussion late this afternoon. So we'll see you again.
we'll be worshiping with you shortly and we'll see you at 5 o'clock.